Chapter 2. That afternoon, something happened. Something that gave me more than school work and chores and weather to write about. Snow fell heavier during the morning, and I stayed home from school. It was hard to get home from school when there were storms. Once, we had to stay all night in our schoolroom, sleeping close to the wood stove in our coats and hats and mittens, making our lunches last through the night, listening to the wind moaning around the corners of the school, listening to Mr. Willett, our teacher, snore. When the wind grew stronger, Sarah sent me out to bring in all the animals, sheep from the west meadow, the cattle, and the 2 horses. Cassie helped me herd the sheep. The wind blew Cassie's long hair loose from under her hat. "Do we like winter?" Cassie asked. I looked at her quickly. I could tell she wasn't kidding. Cassie asked questions because she wanted to know the answers, like Sarah. I looked at Cassie and she looked back at me, her eyes as sharp as Sarah's. My mother died when I was born, so I didn't know if I was like her. "We like winter sometimes," I said. She carried a bucket of grain in front of the sheep. They followed her as if she were their mother. "I don't like this," Cassie said. I opened the barn door and the sheep ran inside. "You like to skate when the slough freezes over," I said to her. Cassie smiled. "I like that part of winter." We closed the sheep pen. The smell of fresh hay filled the barn. Cassie sneezed. "Now, for the cows," I said. Cassie frowned at me. I pulled her hand, and we raced outside, out of the quiet of the barn into the wind, Cassie's hair flying out behind her like corn silk. Sarah cooked soup on the stove, stirring it with a long-handled spoon. Cassie drew a picture at the table. I looked over her shoulder. "What's that?" I asked. "It's the man," she said firmly. Sarah turned from the stove. "What man?" asked Sarah. "One of Cassie's imaginary friends," I told her. Sarah looked at the drawing. "That's lovely, Cass, and original." "Lovely and original," said Cassie, imitating Sarah. Sarah looked out the window. "Caleb, you left the barn door open," she said. "I closed it. I know I did," I said. I put on my coat and went out. I ran my hand along the rope that we tied, one end to the house, the other by the barn door. When the storms were bad, anyone could get lost. A neighbor of ours had lost his way during a night storm and was found the next morning frozen to death. I looked in the barn, then stepped inside. Something was different. Something. May was there in her stall. The sheep bleated at me. Then there was a horse in the next stall, Bessa's stall. It was a horse I'd never seen before. "What? Who are you?" I asked, reaching out to touch the horse. I heard a sound behind me and whirled around. There, slumped against the wall, was an older man with gray hair. He was wrapped in a green blanket. He stared at me, but he said nothing. "Who are you?" I asked. Then, gathering courage, "Where did you come from?" The man didn't answer. He began to cough. I backed up. "Wait," I told him. "Stay here." And I ran from the barn, calling Sarah's name over and over. Sarah hurried after me to the barn, her coat flung around her shoulders. "Who is he?" she asked. I shook my head. He didn't say. We opened the barn door and the man looked up at Sarah. Sarah stepped inside and closed the door. "Are you sick?" she asked. "There's influenza here. I have to protect my children." The man shook his head. "I'm not sick," he said in a low voice. "I'm cold, cold to the bone." Sarah reached out to touch his forehead briefly. "You don't have a fever." "No, I'm just cold." Sarah paused, then made up her mind. "Help me get him inside, Caleb," she said. "There's no need," said the man. "I can rest here in the barn." "You'll do no such thing," said Sarah. The man stared at Sarah for a moment. You could tell he thought about arguing with her. Then he reached out his hand to me. I helped him up, and Sarah and I walked him out the barn and across the yard. When we opened the door and walked into the house, Cassie stared at the man with her sharp, bird-like look. Sarah helped the man to a chair and put a quilt around him. "There, that's warmer. Caleb, get him hot tea from the stove, please." I poured tea into a cup and handed it to the man. I studied him very carefully. We didn't have visitors at the farm very often, and never strangers. Cassie stood next to me.